Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the third installment of Pints and Prata, jointly organized by IMDA, Singapore Global Network, also known as SGN, and GovTech. I'm Carolyn, IMDA's UK Talent Partnership Director. Before we start with the webinar proper, here's a quick rundown of today's program. We will kickstart the webinar with a panel discussion based on some of the questions you had already submitted. If you have any new questions, hit the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit. And everyone else, please upvote the questions you want to hear answered so we can get to them this afternoon. Today, we have the founders of two very exciting startups talk about their journey from concept to reality. Like you, I really want to hear about how they came up with a viable idea, getting the funding, and taking it to market. I'd like to introduce Mr. Kenneth Low, who is the CEO and co-founder of Seet, which is currently part of the ShopBack Group. Seet is a fintech which helps people make smarter financial decisions and has the largest personal finance community in Singapore. Our other guest, Mr. Joshua Wong, is the co-founder of Hypotenuse, a B2B AI startup. Prior to this, Joshua was a machine learning scientist and software engineer for Amazon Alexa, and graduated from Cambridge University reading computer science. So the first question we have for Kenneth and Joshua is, how did you come up with your startup idea, and what would you recommend for others looking for ideas? Kenneth?
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn. And I think first of all, it's great to be here with you guys. For us, it's 10 p.m. in Singapore. And it's nice to see Joshua and the team as well. So I think to your question on the idea itself, I think it really comes from your own experiences. So I think for us back then, we were in our last semester in undergraduate studies in Singapore. And we realized that there is a big problem around personal finance. And we believe that personal finance is like fundamentally broken. So we decided to find better ways to solve it. And then that's where it sort of evolved into the idea of Seet along the way. Of course, undergoing many pivots as well. That was about 4 years ago. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks a lot, Carolyn, for organizing this, as well as SGN and GovTech. It's really cool to be here. Nice to see Kenneth again as well. Yeah, so to your question about how we came up with this, for us, this was going back to when we were in Amazon. When one day me and my co-founder already worked on a lot of projects together, and one day he came to me and he was like building this e-commerce website, trying to sell vegan soap. So yeah, don't ask me why he was trying to sell vegan soap, but anyway. So one thing that he found was extremely difficult, or he was extremely frustrated with, was just like, you have a whole inventory, 20 to 30 different products, and you're trying to write like descriptions and good like copy content for each of them. It was extremely difficult, and he was extremely frustrated with it. And we realized that from the tech we learned from what we've built, what we've experimented with, we knew we could kind of, we knew we could build a technology that could kind of automate this process. So that's a bit about, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, that's great. Thank you very much. So I think the next question is, you guys have this really great idea, right? And the next step is to, how do you go about making sure that your idea is something that will have the demand, that would be something that people will really want to use. So yeah, Kenneth?
Yeah, so I mean, I would sort of bring in the idea that leveraging what, one of the very famous LinkedIn founders, Reid Hoffman, shared before as well, which is that startups are basically assembling a plane while like it's crashing, right? So I think it's never one idea that will get adoption. It's always about experimentation and iteration. So I think for us, early days, we literally built a PDF collector. So we actually built a PDF collector that collected bank statements that we would assemble using an Excel sheet. So the idea was to test whether people were willing to give financial information to a totally unknown brand, not even relatively unknown, totally unknown brand, to trust them to be able to give them insights into their personal finance lives. And in one day, we got 20 to 30 different PDFs from different people. So I think that really validated the assumption that people are willing to forgo financial information because they want to see it in a simpler way. And that got us to the first iteration of the product, which is an expense tracking app that syncs your bank accounts and transactions. Along the way, we raised funding and we had more experiments down the road, and we sort of pivoted to become a very big finance community in Singapore. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so it's based. Do you send the email out to people, or do you how do you reach out to them?
There was two ways. The first one was within the school itself. So we literally stuck up posters asking people if they wanted to simplify their finances. So just put up a one-liner. Are you looking to simplify your finance? Drop us an email or visit our website. The landing page is simple. It's just a simple landing page with the value prop, and then they can submit their PDF. So that was first way. Second way was run very low budget advertising, paid marketing for the first 20 to 30 customers, and you see what's the conversion, whether people actually buy into the idea of what you're trying to sell them.
Cool. And how about yours, Josh? Because you are a B2B, so it's a slightly different angle. How do you get your validation?
Yeah, good question. So I guess for us as well, the definition of MVP to us, or validating our ideas with MVPs, I would see MVPs as not just kind of building out the whole product and then showing it to users, but more of the idea of trying to figure out what's the riskiest part of the startup and how can you de-risk that. Most of the time, this is customers, this is requiring you to kind of build out something minimal. But for us, it's just kind of trying to see whether this is something people want or whether this is something that businesses need. So for us, what we did back then was just to really just basically build up a landing page. We just built up a landing page, something that could very simply enough show what we were doing. And then we decided to post it up on forums. We decided to reach out to companies with that idea and see whether there was a need. We got a lot of interest in there, and that's how we kind of validated that, hey, this was a pain point that not only we were facing, but lots of e-commerce companies were seeing the same need as well.
Okay, so it was a more studied approach rather than guerrilla sort of research.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's about just kind of what's that minimal way, even because if we spent 6 months building it, by then we might have gone in the wrong direction. So it's to us kind of what's that minimal thing that you can build just to test out whether that riskiest part is, just to kind of minimize that riskiest part of your idea.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. So I think the next thing that we'll want to find out, that we had the questions, questions that we got was so now that you've got the idea, then the next step is getting the next steps, right? So I want to find out from you, is it the funding or is it the team that you felt were the next steps for you? Kenneth?
Yeah, maybe I can jump in here. So I definitely do think it's the team. Most of the time, I think there's some research done by, I believe, Stanford or one of these colleges about the most successful startup teams, and usually it's between 2 to 3 people, usually a mix of technical and non-technical people. So I think first step is to really understand your strengths and weaknesses and being very self-aware about it. So understanding your skill sets, understanding your personality types and who you interact well with, who you can work well with. And then the natural next step is to figure out how can you find complementary individuals to fit your weaknesses, right? And then hopefully you can actually have strengths that counter and complement your partner as well. So it's a bit like dating. It's a bit like marriage as well, because I've been married to my work wife for 5 years now, and it's been going well. We met in SF actually, in San Fran.
Okay.
We met through the school network, the school entrepreneurship network through NOC, and thankfully we've worked well together. We've fundraised, and then after that everything comes along. So I think it's always about finding the good team that investors will buy into, because investors are buying into the team, because actually you have no product, you have no users, and they are funding the team who they believe can make these things become reality.
Excellent. And your finding was because you were in the same space. So was it like a meetup that you met, or was it in school?
He was actually a senior from school, from NUS Computer Science. So I knew I needed to meet a lot of computer science and engineering people, because I come from a finance background in NUS. So my background would definitely complement someone who is more builder kind of personality. For me, I'm more of the sales guy, going out there to talk to companies, talk to users, a very thick skin kind of approach. So I think there's different ways that we complement each other. Yeah. So we
Sounds
met
good.
in NOC. Yeah.
Okay, exciting. And is it just a two-man show from your end, or do you have more people join in?
We had the two-man show for about 6 months before we hired our first software engineer, front-end software engineer. So he could do back-end. Then I would do marketing, partnerships, and the user stuff. So it's sort of, we make sure we didn't grow too quickly as well. And then after that, the fourth guy was a marketer. So we brought the marketer on from a writing background because we knew content was a big thing for us as well. Yeah.
Excellent.
And
Okay, thank you.
right now we are at about 14 people, 1-4. So I think we've grown in size in some way, but still keeping very lean. Yeah.
So sort of organic growth rather than just
Yeah.
hiring people for the sake of hiring.
Exactly. I think that's important.
Excellent.
Very
Yeah.
important for all startups to have.
Good. Thank you. And yourself, Joshua?
Yeah, sorry, do you mind repeating the first question again?
Okay, in terms of the team, right? I think the question was, in terms of your team, how do you manage to find the talent to work with you, and how do you get the right fit, and how do you grow from there?
Yeah, a really good question. And I completely agree with Kenneth's point as well. I think finding startup founders is really like a marriage, and it's a marriage that goes on for a very, very long time as well. Especially when the journey is extremely difficult. You spend way more time in the office than anywhere else. It matters to get someone that you can work with. For me, it was finding people that, my first line has always been finding people that I've worked with before, because these are people that we know that there is some kind of synchrony between us. We've seen the way we've worked together before. We knew the way each other worked. So that's been my always kind of like first level. And it's people that, and that was my kind of like first co-founder coming on board. And then the second level is just kind of people who I've met before, people who I've known for a period of time, friends, people who I know who like kind of share that same vision or motto about like just wanting to work at an extreme pace, but to kind of want to build something that people want. Yeah, so that's yeah.
Sorry,
so that's
continue.
how we found it. So that's kind of how we started with the team, and then and then from there, if like expanding forward, it's just about like kind of like what's that wider network of people, friends of friends, and connections as well.
Okay, just to check in with you. I think for Kenneth, you mentioned about the team as you grow organically. Do you grow with people that you already know? So were they like referrals, or would you actually go out to the market or the street and look for people as well?
That's a very interesting one because I happen to be quite thick-skinned, right? So literally my first startup, the one before Seet, I went to the School of Engineering and I literally contacted the professors and sort of told them that we were doing a FYP, but we were not doing FYP. So we were doing a previous startup, and he actually blasted out an email to all the engineering students to say, there's this business student looking for FYP partner. Do you want to join? And then we had, personally, I interviewed 4 co-founders, and then I got one of them. But that's the very scrappy way to do it. So I realized that way probably doesn't work out that well in the long run. So the second way I approached this was through the network. So the network of the school, and in particular the NUS Overseas Colleges program. And it's sort of already a pre-filtered list of people who are very motivated to build products, to have the entrepreneurial streak. And that has proven true because we are in the same stage of life, which is very important. So we are both getting married soon. We are both getting our houses soon. So I think there's all these things that also need to sort of gel nicely along to ensure that all founders have equal motivation and they want the same things for the company and for themselves. I think that's important.
Okay. Oh, congratulations, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Exciting stuff. Okay, so thanks for telling us about the team. So I think the next level, correct me if I'm wrong, I would say it would be funding to get a startup for next step. Okay, so in terms of funding, I mean, it's one of the problems that is the eternal question: do I use my own funds? If not, how do I get my own funds if you don't have that nest egg ready to use, or how do you go out to the street to get money? So there's always a tricky part for a lot of entrepreneurs. I think a lot of times a lot of them get blocked after the idea phase and go like, okay, I don't have the funds. I've got the team, but I don't have the funds. So I think so the first question I have is, right, that has been asked is, do you use any of your own funds? And if you did, how much of it were you prepared to risk, not in numbers, but in terms of maybe a portion of your personal funds? Kenneth?
So I would say there's different approaches in terms of where you can get funding. My first startup, I went down the government grant route, and that was a very painful and tend to be very misleading route as well, because it makes you do things and milestones which may not actually validate the market need. So there are milestones to hit to unlock grants at later stages. So that one was about $50,000 to $60,000. My second company was because I had some experience and some network with angel investors and seed investors. So the first check-in was quite fast. That one was just under $100,000 from one of the investors who was interested in my previous company. So I would say having connections and being in the scene, networking definitely helps a lot, together with the school's connection. So I think having the NUS experience and the background as well help in like warming some of these connections to say that this is a trustworthy team to sort of invest into. But I would say, to your earlier question on whether you should put in your own money, founders have already skin in the game. And the skin in the game is that you're spending hours and hours, weekdays, weekends, working on your idea. So in any startup, it's about whether you can put in energy, which is time, or you put in money. So you have to convince other people to believe that you are the one to convert their money into more money, into bigger valuations and bigger use cases, more users. So I would say, if you have your own funds, great. But a lot of the times, I would suggest entrepreneurs to de-risk as best as possible to find investors who believe in your idea. So I think that gives you a good runway. You can sleep better at night, which is very important as well to founders. Yeah.
Yep. So what you feel is that you give the time and energy and they give the money. So there's a nice balance rather than throwing everything into the basket.
Yeah, if not, it's not too diversified and you can get very stressful at night. And I always believe that a good night's sleep is important. Very uncommon for founders, but yeah.
But yes, you need to be fresh. And how about yourself, Joshua?
Yeah. So for us, we got funded from like US investors. It's not publicly disclosed yet, so I can't share too much about that area. But my belief of funding is that the way to kind of get funding is to first get traction. And by traction, I mean kind of showing progress in some way, whether that's being able to build out your product, whether that's being able to get your first users, first paying customers or something. And when you can get traction attracts capital, and capital also attracts talent. And that's where kind of a lot of things fall into place in a type of cycle over there. So I think the first step is really getting some traction first, show that your idea works in some way. And then you want to raise funds from there, because you want to raise funds to make sure that you're already heading in that right direction. And then that funds are just to accelerate the growth rather than to just kind of like raise money to kind of find your path around. As to the question about whether to put in like our own money, I do agree that this kind of differs from person to person as well. I've seen that most investors I've seen don't really like definitely expect this. The only time I've seen some of them expect it is if you're already a serial entrepreneur where you've made a positive exit, and then it makes sense to be putting some of your money back in just to show that you believe in this idea. But otherwise, it's also okay to not like, especially on the part about validating your idea, you don't need a lot of money for that, and it's okay to not spend a lot of money just in your company at the start as well.
Yeah, actually, I have something to add here, Carolyn, if I may just jump in. Fundraising is not the end goal. I think a lot of people think that, after the funds are raised, like celebrate, there's champagne and there's confetti, but that's actually the stress, right? Because you have a runway, you have all these things you've promised to investors, and now this is the time that it starts ticking, right? So I think it can be over sensationalized in the news, right? So fundraisings, like you've probably read about so many companies like fundraise, and then suddenly 1 year later you see them in the news for another reason, is that they closed down. So all that glitters is not gold. I think that's a very important phrase if you want to come onto this startup path. And the grass is always greener on the other side, because you're thinking like this other company fundraise at, I don't know, amazing valuation. They have so much money, so many renowned investors. But in this game we play, the risk is crazy. And it's for you as startup entrepreneurs to try and de-risk it along the way.
So I think what I hear
small
is,
point.
yeah, sorry.
Sorry, small point to add there as well. I completely agree with Kenneth. And I think that on that note, I think it's also a dangerous thing to be thinking about like funding especially raising funds before product market fit, because that only causes you to want to spend a lot of money going in the wrong direction. And then you're burning a lot of time and a lot of effort in the wrong place. Whereas if you can kind of keep extremely lean and just kind of spend that small amount of money to find your direction first. And once you have that certainty, then you raise funds. That helps way more.
Okay, so we're saying is actually getting funding is not the end, but rather just the start of your whole journey then.
It's
Okay.
like a little milestones that you hit along the way, but yeah.
Okay, just one of them. Just a quick one, Joshua, you mentioned about if you get all these funds, you tend to go the wrong direction. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I think one thing as well is that once you raise a lot of money from a bunch of investors, especially VCs, there's a lot of pressure to grow and like completely focus on growth and like also spend that money that you've been given, no matter how big the round you've raised is. And if you're pre-product market fit and you're still trying to figure out what you are doing, you're gonna go in like all sorts of different tangents, and you're gonna end up focusing on growth, but in the wrong direction. So you could be building something that people don't want, or users don't want it, and you're just going to be burning that money in the wrong way. And that's, I think, more dangerous, because that leads you down the path of kind of like a faster way to kind of kill your company, because you're going to run out of money very quickly, and rather than kind of finding that direction.
Okay. Oh, that's a very good advice for pitfalls to avoid.
Actually, in this game of fundraising, right, it could be also a flip side. So sometimes VCs want you to fail faster. So there are a lot of stories where they're asking you to, let's say you raise a 500,000 seed round. They'll ask you to, in the next 12 months, figure out whether you can survive or not. So they are actually very aggressive, because on the other side of the table, they are betting on 100 companies. You're just one of the 100 or 200 or 300, or however big the portfolio is. So as far as it's your baby to you, to them, you're just an experiment to them. So I think it's important to, these are some of the real things in the private equity world that not many people talk about. Yeah.
So how do you know if they want you to fail faster?
They always want you to fail faster, because if you fail faster, there's a chance that you will do better. Because if the faster you fail, if you're hustler enough, you'll find a way to pivot and to change your idea to make it work.
And how would they push you into that space to
They'll
get
just
you?
check in with you every month. End of month, their analysts will come and talk to you. What's the growth rate like? Have you considered this? Have you considered that? If they're good, if they're not good investors, they'll just leave you alone. Yeah.
Okay. And then so in terms of the funding, right? What sort of areas do you go? I mean, you mentioned VCs and you mentioned angel investment. How do you go around finding these people? I mean, I think for you, Kenneth, is your network. But generally, if somebody out there who doesn't have the sort of network, how do they go about doing it? And also, do you get anybody outside of that area to look at the investment and say, actually, these guys are not very good investors, let's not work with them, or was it just because there was the funds, let's just go for it?
Joshua, you want to share your perspective from accelerators? Maybe that was one way to.
Yeah, I think that's in terms of accelerators. I mean, accelerators definitely help in some way. I guess, Kenneth, you can chip in a little on this I think you went through the FinTech accelerator. Accelerators are beneficial at the start as well, especially if you're kind of figuring out what you want to do and you want to, and there's kind of like that check marks. They also help a little bit in investor introductions. I think always a warm introduction to an investor always helps a lot more than having cold intros. But the way I've seen even cold intros work out very well is if you can show traction or progress. You can show traction or progress. It doesn't matter if like you don't know any investors, they will come and find you. And if you can show that you can hit some amount of profitability really early on, then all the other parts don't matter so much. They will be the ones that really want to put money in you.
Yeah, so definitely agree. Accelerators and incubators are great ways to get your feet wet. And I honestly think like in startups and in entrepreneurship, it's never about one company. It's always about rolling and growing along the way because um, yeah, so it's very uncommon for the first thing that you do to be the big thing. It's very often the third thing, fourth thing, fifth thing. Yeah, so you just have to have the grit and keep building on your network. So I think to get your feet wet, if you're totally cold, incubators, accelerators work really well. And of course, IHL, so Institute of Higher Learning, your universities would have very smart and very rich people who are also part of the network that want to get into tech and startups as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Carolyn, I saw a question on the Q&A. I don't know if it's worth answering at this stage. It's about...
Is it the initial stage one about
Yeah,
equity? Yeah,
yes.
I was about to ask you that. Fantastic. Yeah. So, do you want to answer that then?
Yeah. So in the initial stages, can they share how much money would they give for equity? Okay,
Yep.
it's a very good question. Honestly speaking, it's anyone's guess because in the early stages, fundraising rounds are really it's on a fews basis, right? So we raised our first round at about $1 million post money. So that's really anyone's guess on why they selected $1 million and why we agreed to it. But I think it gave us that first 100,000 to really run with things and stuff. So we agreed to that valuation and everything went through. So I think that's roughly the range for the first check-in very often. And accelerators differ. So accelerators have different standard terms that you have to agree with to get your first funds in. So it's really your call on whether you want to take that first check.
Yeah, same here as well. I think it's a very early stage. It's hard. There's not much science to this rather than it's an art. You kind of try and figure out how much runway you need, or like how much you need to, let's say, like survive like 18 months or a year, and or how much you need to kind of get a bit more product market fit. And then you just kind of think about how much you're willing to dilute as well. For us, it was kind of at 2M, but then like it really depends on kind of like individual cases and like how you think about that. I think the best is just to kind of think about your cash flow and how much runway you need, and then raise from there.
Sounds good. Okay, thanks for that. Just a reminder for anyone who's got any questions, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So feel free to type your questions in. And for anyone else, do check in and upvote the questions that you want to see answered. I know there's a couple more questions, but we'll go to the next topic before we go back to the ideas one. So the next one we have is some practical questions, right, for entrepreneurs. I think let's go to the ideas ones. So this Ashton has asked, I'm stuck with not having ideas, although I eventually want to start my own business. So the question is, how do you get that spark, the first idea before you even go to validating it? What do you do to even get that, oh, this is something that I really think can work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'll take a stab at this. So I think one thing is first getting into that mindset of just kind of consciously noticing the problems around you and constantly thinking about it. Kind of speaking to people in the industries that you're interested in and figuring out what are their pain points over there. Because when you're actively thinking about this or having that mindset, it tends to be that you notice that there are actually a lot of problems around and a lot of ideas that are going around. And it's just a kind of idea of like which of these are actually good. And I think the second part is also that one thing that I think hinders a lot of us is that we think that there's this notion of a very magical moment that like once we land on this idea, we immediately know it's going to be like Facebook or Google, and we immediately clicks that this is the one that we want to do. I don't think there is that moment. I think that most of the time this is much more subtle, and it's more that, like, if anything, ideas are cheap. Ideas are the easy part. It's about the execution that's everything. Most of the time, like if we look even at the biggest companies around us, most of these ideas are not even new. Before Facebook, there was MySpace. Before Google, there was Yahoo. Even if we're looking at the Singaporean companies, when Carousel started, there were already marketplaces all over the world. Before Shopback, there was already Ebates in the US, Top Cashback in the UK. But it helps us have a bit of a domain expertise in this area. And once you see that, you realize that there are the idea space is large. You tend to have a lot of them, and it's just about narrowing it down. One way I think about or like a kind of a good way to kind of narrow down this idea space is to think in terms of what are you good at, what do you like, and what can add value to the world. And when you can find the intersection of these three, or you can use this as a way to kind of filter down the ideas you have. And if you can find an intersection of these three, then I think that's a really strong space that you can play with.
Thank you, Joshua. That's really good. And Kenneth?
Yeah, I mean, 99% of what Joshua shared is totally perfect. I think the 1% to sort of add to that is execution is everything, really. I think it cannot be emphasized enough that, I mean, we had idea of Facebook probably like when you're sleeping, and then you're thinking about it. But, Mark Zuckerberg got up, he did something about it. He created the Facebook for the Harvard students first. So it's about executing and iterating and executing. And that's what make the best people, especially in this tech world that we live in. Because changes can come like this, and COVID presents a lot of opportunities as well. I think it's a very big shift, and everyone's talking about this word new normal, which has been used too many times in the past 3 months. But it is really a new normal, and with new normals, there's a lot of opportunities and new businesses that will definitely come out of this. It's just what ideas you have and whether you execute on them.
Okay, thanks for the segue into the COVID question. So I think that's on top of everybody's minds why we are here and not in a physical space is COVID. So the question is, how did it impact it came quite suddenly, so I don't think many people had plans, to work around COVID. So when it hit, right, I'd like to hear how you guys looked at the problem and how you guys saw the way forward for your teams and for your projects.
Okay, maybe I'll answer this first. So for us, there's 2 big ways that impacted us. I think first one is with regards to our strategy. So we have a yearly 2000 PAX conference that happens in Suntec, Singapore. So it's like we booked out 2 halls for this. So that one is immediately gone, right? You have to move everything online, and we have to refund tickets. We have to refund sponsors as well. So it's not easy, and it's very painful. But thankfully, we are largely online business with regards to everything else we do. So that piece as well had to shift. We had to shift towards investments because suddenly everyone wanted to become an investor, and which I throw out a word of caution as well because the markets are very volatile at this moment. But everyone's search intent for online brokerages, stocks discussions, ETFs, everything went up. So we had to cater our audience towards that crowd. No one was searching for travel insurance. No one was searching for no one was searching for savings accounts. Everything went towards investments and stocks. On the team front, we basically had to ensure that we took care of everyone's health. Work from home became a normal. This is a very normal occurrence for us as well. We do a lot of online content like this as well with the team.
Yeah, and I guess for us it's a little bit different in that we're a bit new. So we actually started and quit our jobs and everything in the middle of COVID. And I think COVID there are a lot of, it affects the economy and everything, but it creates change. And every time there is some change created, it creates opportunities for new startups or new ideas that can come about. And if anything, it also accelerates certain things. Like for us now, it's accelerating things going offline to online. And I think we also benefited from the fact that what we were doing was also helping with the process of going from offline to online. So it didn't affect us too much in that area. I think what it affected was some of our go-to-market strategies where we wanted to do a lot more like face-to-face selling with people, especially in B2B. So we had to change all that to kind of like online sales. I think what was also beneficial there is that now we don't have to, because we're a SaaS company, we sell globally, and it's actually easier for us to sell globally now because of COVID, because no one expects us to actually fly down to the US or the UK to speak to them. They're actually okay with us just having things completely remote and just closing deals remotely. So in some way that's benefited, but otherwise we had to kind of make a lot of strategic changes because of that as well.
Okay, talking about quitting your jobs, right? So I think, Joshua, one of the questions that we had was, what gave you the strength or what made you leave your day job with Amazon to start to focus on the company itself?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll say that working for a big company or working for a big tech company it's great. Like it's nice in that like your pay is good, the perks are nice, there's smart people around and everything, and it's really really comfortable being in a big company, and everything is okay. But the problem is that everything is just okay. At some point, you realize that your learning starts to taper off. At some point, you realize that there's a cap on how much value you can create in a short span of time. And that's okay if you're at a point of your life where you think that you just want to be comfortable, that's fine. But for me, now is not that point. And the reason why I left is because while I still have that kind of energy to want to spend all my waking hours at work, while I still can afford to take the kind of risk, while I still can live on very, very little money every single day, I want to make sure that I spend all that time and all the energy to create value in the world in some way.
Oh, that sounds awesome. And Kenneth, I know you are a serial entrepreneur, so I can't ask you the same question. I think the question that we have is, what sort of challenges do you face from your family and friends because you walk down the non-traditional path right off the bat? So how do you resist all the Chinese New Year questions about when you're getting a job?
Yeah, it's a very real question. I think the good thing about this is that we are riding a wave of technology. So even your relatives have phones and they have apps and they have a browser, so you can sort of direct them there to check out your product. So I think it's a lot more understandable than I would say the 2000s where everyone had to be on a desktop. So they see technology as a real wave, and it's a very good opportunity for anyone to sort of get in the space. And I think worst come to worst, actually this is a very important point. I think worst come to worst for founders, even if your company fails someday down the road, there are opportunities for you, and it's because you would have seen a lot more, you would have dealt with a lot more problems, be it on the market or people problems as well, because you have to hire people, you have to manage people, you have to train people. So I don't think entrepreneurs or founders should be too worried, because at the end of the day, there is a safety net of sorts, but it's just not obvious because the network you've grown, people will be looking up to you, saying if this doesn't work out, come join me, you know. And sometimes they tell you that it's like, you know, at the end of the day, let me know what you want to do next, and my door is always open here and there.
So you say you've developed marketable skills that if touch wood, if you ever want to go back to the other ways of working, you can.
Definitely. I mean, even Joshua, right? I mean, Joshua used to work in Shopback, and he's one of the superstars. In fact, Henry, the current co-founder and CEO, has been asking him to join Shopback because I think he's done well. So I think if you're a genuinely good person, in hardworking, smart as well, there will be opportunities for you. So I think don't have to worry too much. Yeah.
Okay, so I think the key values, as in being a good team player, being a hard worker, is something that you can carry across any sort of.
Anywhere, yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, so I've got some questions about the startup scene in Singapore, as well as your experience there. So I think one of the questions is, for people who are new and want to find out more about startups, do you have any recommendations as to where they can go to join and find out more? Because sometimes it can be quite isolating. I know it's COVID, but are there any, like, there used to be meetups, but maybe they've gone virtual, where people can join in and ask questions and network?
I guess Pints and Prata would be
Oh, thank you. I can hear Brenda laughing in the background.
I mean, this is definitely one place, right? So I used to be like that 5 years ago. I was attending every single conference or every single workshop, and I'll definitely LinkedIn message the person after, because you never know who this person can introduce you to or maybe help you along the way. So I think attending such things are definitely very positive, very good. You need to be very thick-skinned, and there are also a lot of online conferences and meetups. Now you can meet people if it's less than 5 people. So you should do coffee meetups with anyone you can grab on LinkedIn. Out of 10 people, probably 1 person will reply you. So that's always good. Yeah, so I think being very thick-skinned, because at the worst case scenario is that they don't reply you, and it's totally cool as well. And anyone who is hungry will do that. Yeah.
Sounds good. Okay, so just basically don't be shy. And yourself, Joshua? Because yours is a B2B, so it's slightly different. How would you, do you have any sort of advice for people?
Yeah, I guess in terms of communities, I guess if it's about communities in Singapore and the tech scene here, I'll defer that to Kenneth because he spent more time in the Singapore tech scene. I've mostly been in either the US or the UK.
Okay, maybe give us some rundown on UK or US tech scene then.
Yeah, I think I'll speak in terms of the US. I think US is, but for one, I think that the Singapore tech scene has been growing a lot. Back then compared to 2015 versus now, it's grown so much. Like back then there was only like Block 71 in the one-off area, and now there's like, it's like a whole village of startups over there now. There's so much more help now than before. I think the only thing sometimes I see missing is that kind of culture of Silicon Valley being very kind of widely accepted all over the place. I think the difference is just in Silicon Valley, when you're there, it's like by default, you are there, it's like starting a company, and that's okay. And like everyone kind of helps you. There's a whole kind of culture of like being very, very open and like helping to build on your ideas rather than to shoot them down. If you fail, there's no issue there. You are like, you're great for failing in some way. Sometimes like it's okay to fail because you're going to learn 1,000 new things, and then you just keep trying there. And there's a culture that builds up on top of itself. And I think that's what makes things good over there.
Yeah, and do you see that happening in Singapore, Kenneth?
I think it's progressively happening. You have to choose the people to be around with. I think that's very important. I think if you surround yourself with people who are always negative and who are very corporate career path focused, then naturally they'll be wondering, this weirdo is trying to do things and he's failing. Look at him, he's failing. And it's very natural. It's a very natural human behavior to sort of, they don't want you to fail, but they're like, oh, I know this guy will sort of screw up someday. So I don't know if it's a Singapore thing, but I know that when I went over to SF, in fact, I was contacting Joshua as well because he went there a few months before me for a pilgrimage, right? Startup pilgrimage. So I think when we went over, it's different in the mindset and the learnings as well. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, Carolyn, I think you dropped off a little bit.
I think my Wi-Fi cut off briefly.
Yeah.
Am I back?
Yes, you are back. Yes.
Oh, thank goodness. Sorry, you said you went to San Fran for pilgrimage and then?
Yeah, pilgrimage. Yeah, I think everyone can do it if you're able to go over to learn, to talk to people. Just go to the startup dojos there, to figure out the mentality. Live in the startup village. There's all these things that you can learn. It's very different.
I think we might need to get from you the context as to who they can go or who they can look up when they want to go there.
Yeah, sure.
Fantastic.
I have some. I'm sure Joshua has a lot more. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so audience, do bear in mind if you do fancy a trip out to San Fran, ping Kenneth and Joshua for some trip ideas. Sorry, I just threw you guys out there. I think let me see how much time we've got left. Okay, I've got a few more questions. I think one more thing we have to say. So what's next for you guys? What's the next plans for your scaling up from where you are right now? I think Kenneth you're probably further down the line. Joshua, you are quite fresh still, so maybe from your different point of views, tell us where, how you see your next steps to look like.
Sure,
Joshua.
I'll go first. Yeah, so for us in the immediate kind of future, it's definitely ramping up on things like sales, ramping up on building out, fleshing out a lot more of our product, building the things that we know people want, the features that they've been asking for, especially the companies that have been asking for it. In the long run, I think we always see what we're doing as like this written content generation, everything is really just a beachfront for us. This is not our end goal. And I think there are so many more things that we want to do. It's just kind of our beachfront to kind of make sure we build up this niche in this area, get into selling to the e-commerce companies. And then thereon, it's really about building out what we believe will be that kind of future experience that will be for e-commerce, like let's say 5 years down the road for us. And that's kind of our goal in the coming time.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Kenneth?
Yeah, for us, we've spent the last 4 odd years building up a community of 1.1 million monthly active users coming to the site. So I think that's like a consumer side of things. the next big step for us is the business. Like, how do we connect them with consumers in a meaningful way in the finance space, which is very tricky because today's people's perception of business and finance is that it's all sales, it's all gimmicks, they're all trying to sell me insurance. But how do we sort of change that behavior and change that mindset? So next step for us is making sure that businesses see value in the platform enough that they want to pay to be on the platform. So the monetization and the commercialization of the business is like the next big leap for Seet as a company.
Exciting. And are you planning to go expand your geographical reach as well?
I would say not in the next 12 months. Again, for a few factors, I would say we're not quite done with the Singapore market yet. So we believe in the mantra that you should go deep and go integration, very strong integration with the business partners. So that's our strategy. And Singapore is also the financial hub for Southeast Asia, so that helps in a lot of ways as well.
Sounds good. Okay, thank you. We've got 10 minutes left. So before we go to more Q&A, I think we want to get this out to make sure we have enough time. So I think the key question is, so what advice do you have for other young professionals or any young people who are starting out, or even older people, say like my age, who wants to go into a startup or contemplating a career change? What advice do you have for them? As you know, maybe you can summarize what you've mentioned today and any things you can share.
Yeah, maybe I'll just jump in real quick. I think the biggest advice to give someone would be just to start, either on the side or get confidence in starting. Because I think if you never start, you are never ready. There isn't a conception where, okay, I'm officially ready. I got a degree in startups. I got a bachelor's, I got a master's in startups. There is no such situation. I think you just have to do it, and then you realize that it's okay to learn along the way, because this is the route that you would go down. Every day is new. Like HR is new. You learn how to do accounting. You learn how to do people management. You learn how to do, product market fit, technology. And it's okay to not know things. So I think the mentality is just to start and figure out along the way.
And I guess riding on that point as well, I would say that I think we tend to overestimate risk of change a little bit too much, especially growing up as Singaporeans as well. And the fact is that a lot of these things, starting a company, a broad career change, actually doing what we want, a lot of these are two-way doors. If we find that this doesn't work out, we can always go back to kind of what we thought of was initially what we wanted to do. And I think we also tend to overly try and optimize our starting salary way too early, especially the kind of culture that we have. And this often comes at a risk. This often comes at the cost of even doing something meaningful or helping us to learn a lot more. And I think the fact is that we should focus a lot more on growth. We should focus a lot more on growing. And the unfortunate part is that the more skilled you are, the more the better you are, the smarter you are, the more pressure there is to be going into these overly optimized salary roles. And then it becomes a bit of like a trap of the talented. But really, like if you can trade money for lessons, and if you can kind of focus on growth learning at this point, I think that's a very, very good deal to have, because that kind of learning compounds a very long way. And at the end of the day, the starting pay you're trying to optimize for now is really just more of ego amongst peers. But like, it's nothing compared to what you can be able to do like 10 years from now if you're focusing on growth.
Excellent. Joshua, there's a saying behind you, but I can't quite read it. Do I share it with the viewers?
I don't actually know what's behind me. I'm in the office now, so I've never actually read the wall. But I can read it out if you're interested.
Go for it. Yeah.
There are two kinds of people in this world: those who believe they can make things happen, and those who believe things happen to them.
Wow, well said.
Kenneth, was that your idea?
Well said to the wall.
Well said to the whoever did the wall. Yeah.
Okay, I thought it was a personal statement of yours that you were sharing, Joshua. Okay, so we've got very good. We're just about finishing, so we've got another 6 minutes. So we'll go through some of the questions that have been asked. So Hui Ying has been upvoted to ask, can you share what kind of target addressable market or competitors you're looking at before you decide this is a good opportunity? And I think I also want to combine this with a question, or how do you decide among which idea of all the ideas you have to work on? Kenneth?
So yeah, I will jump in on this. I think it's a great question because there definitely needs to be some form of market research before jumping into any. So I think earlier I shared the idea is to just start, but I think the caveat to that is that you need to do some form of research. And one research is what Hui Ying just shared, which is understanding what is the market size. And one investor said this to me: if you are orchard farmer, orchard grower, let's say you're growing fruits, right? How do you know if you want to grow more apple? Do you want to grow apples or do you want to grow oranges? One simple way is to figure out the town next door. Like, do they eat more apples or do they eat more oranges? And then that really hit me as a consumer-facing company, right? And for us, honestly, we didn't do much of this in the early days, but we probably should have figured out how big the finance market was. Thankfully, it's big, but I think that's an important thing to figure out. And the second part that Hui Ying shared as well, which with regards to competitors, I think the important thing to know that competitors doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. It's actually a good thing, because it's important to know that competitors are there because there's definitely a market that you are trying to solve, that people are also trying to solve and they've identified. But also noting how big the competitors are and how nimble they are, because I think those factors will play into how you sort of position yourself in the market. Yeah.
Thanks. And Joshua, from a B2B point of view?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So definitely agree with Kenneth on this. There has to be a bit of like research beforehand that when you're sifting through ideas as well. Target addressable market or total addressable market, there are ways to calculate this. And you want to figure out whether, especially if you're planning to raise like VC money or something, you want to be able to make this number have a B behind it. It has to be, you want to somehow come up with a way to make your total addressable market end with like $1 billion. And most of the time it's okay to start with a niche, but you need to know how that niche can turn into something much bigger. And you need to kind of have that path over there. A good way to kind of calculate this is, if you're B2B, kind of just calculate like, okay, how many e-commerce companies there are there in the world? Maybe there are about like 800,000 e-commerce stores globally. We know like, if we're going to charge, let's say, a subscription model, $200 each, we know that a year, this is a $2 billion total addressable market. So having that calculation on hand is useful, and to kind of do a bit of sifting of ideas as well. Competitors, agree with Kenneth. This is a space that if there are, it's kind of good. You have some validation there. If there aren't, then you want to start questioning why. Look for whether there is a graveyard of companies that have tried this and failed. Figure out why is it that they have failed. Were they missing something? Do you have really something that's new that you can solve it? Or basically just kind of consider those factors there. A good way, especially if B2C, a good way is to kind of just, there are a lot of tools out there to kind of landscape what this industry looks like, what your problem space looks like. And then you can do things like use Alexa rankings or like SimilarWeb to see how much traffic they have. Maybe there are a lot of competitors, but all of them are like very low traffic. Then you know that you can probably beat them out. Maybe they didn't raise any money. They're like, or maybe they did raise a lot, and then you know that you cannot compete in that space. But these are things that you can kind of landscape out and check it out.
Yeah, actually, a very actionable thing to do, right, is download SimilarWeb, the Chrome extension. Yeah, like right now after this sharing, because it will make you be very aware of all the different sites you're visiting, like how much traffic they have, where the users coming from, what are the key search terms that people are searching to get to their websites. And it's I think even if you're not doing it for like competitor analysis, at least you're aware of what these things are in the online world, because all this is important information if you want to play in the startup game.
Okay, so big tip, SimilarWeb, Chrome extension, go download it soon as this is over, not now. So I think we are just about coming to the end. So do stay on if you can for the next half hour where where we'll get Joshua and Kenneth to have a chat with you guys informally. But before we go to that segment, I want to say a big thank you to Joshua and Kenneth. It's extremely generous for you to spend your hour with us and the sharing and the advice that you've given. And I just want to say to everyone as well, thank you for joining us today. This event was brought to you by SGN, GovTech, and IMDA. And just do note that we have Brenda posting this weekend, and Pao Hui will be taking over from Monday. So do feel free to join us. We have a hard stop at 4:30 p.m. And stay with us, and we'll see you there.